They say Clara Whitmore only ever needed one shot. Not two, not a second chance, not a warning, just one. One cold October morning, 3 weeks after her husband was buried, a young man in the back lot behind Morrison's feed store laughed at the rifle on her back and decided he already knew exactly what kind of woman she was. By the end of that morning, he was still staring at a tin cup with a hole through its center. And the whole town of Harland Creek was trying to understand how they had all made the same mistake. Because that was the thing about Clara Whitmore. Argue. She did not argue. She did not explain. She did not stay to watch people regret underestimating her. She only ever pulled the trigger once. Now, small towns are built on repetition. A thing gets told once, then again, then better, then bigger, until what remains is not the truth, but the version people are most comfortable carrying. But this story kept its shape. 30 years later, old Garrett was still telling it the same way. People think the story's about the shot, he would say. It isn't. The shot is just where it starts is a widow. Everyone thought was finished. Where it ends is a lamp in a kitchen window, a man with winter gray eyes, and a boy who finally had somewhere to belong. But on that morning, none of that existed yet. What existed was this: October 1875. Harland Creek, Clara Whitmore riding into town alone with a Sharps rifle on her back, a legal notice in her pocket, and 3 weeks of fresh widowhood hanging on her like a second coat. She had not come to town to impress anybody. She had come because the county land office had sent her a letter. She did not trust, and Clara had long since learned that some problems were better handled in person. So she cut through the lot behind Morrison's feed store. And then she heard the men. There were 7 of them, maybe 8, gathered around the water trough along the north wall of the lot. Young men, mostly, with a particular energy of people who have time and pride and not quite enough judgment to manage the combination carefully. In the middle of them was Cole Briggs. Cole Briggs was 24 years old and wore his new revolver. The way young men wear things they believe defined them prominently, with full awareness of being observed. He was broad across the shoulders and had a face that had not yet been taught humility by anything the world had thrown at it. He had been trying, for the better part of the last half hour, to hit a tin cup. The cup was not large. It had been hung from a rope strung between 2 fence posts above the water trough, and the October wind off the northern flats set it moving in a slow, pendulous swing. The cup was perhaps the size of a closed fist. The distance was approximately 30 yards. The wind was consistent from the northwest, enough to matter. Not enough to be an excuse. Cole had fired 3 shots. The first had gone wide by 1.5 feet. The second had struck the fence post itself, producing a sound like a bell. Struck off-center and a great deal of laughter from the assembled group, the third had disappeared into the dirt, somewhere past the trough. He was not laughing. He wiped the back of his hand across his mouth and turned to face his audience with the expression of a man who has decided. The problem is the equipment. He was preparing a statement about wind conditions and sight calibration when movement at the edge of his vision interrupted him. He saw Clara Whitmore. He took her in the way a young man takes in something he has already decided the value of before looking carefully. Widow's coat, plain and dark, worn boots, unremarkable mare, canvas sack, an old Sharps rifle across her back on a strap that had seen better years. He looked at the rifle. He looked at the men around him. He smiled. "You fixing to shoot something, widow?" His voice carried the easy confidence of someone performing for an audience he trusts. "Or you just carrying your husband's memory around?" A few of the men laughed. One spat into the dust near the trough. Clara Whitmore stopped walking. She did not look at Cole Briggs. This was the first thing that registered, not in the moment, but afterward, when the men in the lot compared notes and tried to reconstruct the sequence. She had stopped walking, and she had not looked at him. She had looked at the tin cup. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the grass near the base of the fence post, at the way the individual blades leaned. She looked at the surface layer of dust near the trough. She looked at the rope, its weight, its length, the arc and rhythm of the swing. Thomas Whitmore had spent 4 years as a long rifle scout in the Army of the Potomac. He had come home from that war with very few words about what he had seen and a very precise understanding of what it meant to read a situation before acting in it. He had taught his wife to shoot not as a recreation but as a discipline. A way of thinking. The shot is the last thing, he used to say, on the eastern pasture in the evenings, with the light going gold, and the sound of the rifle carrying a long way across the flat land. Everything that surrounds it is the first thing. Read the world before you read the distance. She had been doing this for 8 years. She did not stop because Thomas was dead. That rifle ain't fit for anything but hanging on a wall. Cole said, louder now, feeding on the crowd's response. Widow ought to be home anyway. Praying, maybe. Not out here playing. Step aside, Clara said. 2 words. Quiet. Entirely without heat. Cole Briggs stepped aside. He did it from surprise more than intention, but the result was the same. The men around him stepped with him. Clara unslung the sharps. She did it, the way you lift a tool you have used 10,000 times. No ceremony, no pause to let the moment accumulate its own drama. She took the rifle off her shoulder and checked it by feel, a single practice sequence of her hands, confirming what she already knew. And she raised it. The group around the trough went quiet. The particular quality of that silence was something several of the men tried to describe later, and none of them managed precisely. It was not the silence of held breath. It was more specific than that. It was the silence of people who have just realized they may have made a miscalculation and are waiting to find out how significant. Cole Briggs was still standing at the edge of where he had stepped aside. His new revolver was on his hip. He had fired 3 shots at a stationary target from 15 feet closer than this woman was now standing in better light with no crosswind, and had struck the fence post once and the dirt twice. She was standing with both feet on the hard-packed earth, no bracing, no rest, in a cold October crosswind, holding a rifle that he had called a relic. She did not follow the cup with the barrel. This was the second thing people noted afterward. She was not tracking the swing. The barrel was still. She was watching something else, the rope, some said. The grass, said others. Garrett, who was watching from the far fence post with the attention of a man who recognized what he was seeing, said she was watching all of it at once, the way a person watches a landscape rather than a single feature of it. She waited. The cup swung left, paused at the apex of the arc, began the return. She fired. The sharps made it sound. In an open space, that sound is not small. It is a flat, authoritative crack that the air around it has to accommodate. Several men flinched. One took a half step backward. The tin cup spun on its rope, not falling. The shot had not cut the rope. It had gone through the cup itself, dead center, and the force of it had set the cup spinning, and the cup spun in the morning light with that sharp metallic voice. That means a bullet went exactly where a person decided to send it. 1 revolution, 2. The rope slowed it. It settled, still hanging, still on its rope, with a clean hole through its center. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Cole Briggs stood with his mouth slightly open. He was looking at the hole in the cup. He had looked at it from the moment the sound stopped, and he had not looked away since, as though looking away might change what he was seeing. His 3 shots had produced a dented fence post, some disturbed dirt, and a great deal of laughter. Her 1 shot had gone through the middle of a moving target at 30 yards in a crosswind. She lowered the sharps. She did not look at Cole Briggs. She did not look at any of them. She slung the rifle back across her shoulder and picked up her canvas sack from where she had set it in the dust and walked on, through the lot toward the county office on the far side of the block. She did not pause. She did not look back. She walked the way weather moves through an open space, present, effective, entirely indifferent to the impression it leaves. Behind her, the cup was still moving on its rope, catching the October light on each slow rotation. Old Garrett stood at the far fence post and did not put his hat back on for a long time. He was 62 years old and had been in Harland Creek before it had its present name, and he had known Thomas Whitmore for 20 years, from before the war and through it and after it, and he had known what Thomas was. Before Thomas was a sheriff, he had known what Thomas had taught his wife, and why, and with what seriousness. He stood there with his hat in both hands and looked at the still spinning cup, and then at the space where Clara had been standing, and then at Cole Briggs, who was still looking at the cup with the expression of a man whose entire self-understanding has just been quietly and completely disassembled. Lord have mercy, Garrett said. Nobody heard him but the wind. By midday, the story was all over. Harland Creek, by sundown, the distance had grown. By the following morning, the tin cup had become a silver dollar in some versions and a moving target on a string in others. The wind had been reclassified, depending on who was telling it, from a light crosswind to a near gale. The distance from 30 yards to 50. Garrett told the true version. He told it to Morrison, behind the mercantile counter, to Dr. Peterson, on the steps of his office, to the ranch hands at the end of the bar, who were young enough to have been born after the war ended. Thomas Whitmore served 4 years as a scout in the Army of the Potomac, he said, each time in the same unhurried way. Best long rifle man in his regiment, came home and kept teaching himself, and then kept teaching her, not for sport, not for show, because he understood the kind of country they were living in, and he wanted her to be able to survive it. So she got lucky, someone said once. A young man at the bar, not from the county, passing through. Garrett looked at him for a moment. Son, he said, there are things in this world that look like luck from the outside. From the inside, they looked like 20 years of early mornings on a flat pasture with a patient teacher and a rifle you never stopped respecting. He put down his glass. That woman wasn't lucky. She was ready. There's a difference, and it matters. And most people never learn which one they've got until it's too late to change it. Cole Briggs did not sleep well the night after the shot. He lay in his bunk above the livery and looked at the ceiling and thought about the way she had not looked at him when he was talking. He thought about the sequence of things she had looked at instead. The grass, the dust, the rope. He thought about the stillness of her and the one shot and the way she had walked away without looking back. He had been the best shot in Harland Creek for 2 years. He was not the best shot in Harland Creek. That knowledge settled into him over the next several days in the specific, uncomfortable way of truths that arrive through humiliation, not gently, but lastingly. He did not yet know what to do with it. He would figure it out. Clara's legal matter at the county office took 40 minutes. She spoke with the records clerk, a thin man named Pell, who had the look of someone who had been apologizing for his employer for a long time. She asked for the primary survey records on the eastern boundary parcels of the Whitmore land grant. He produced them after a delay that told her he had been instructed to produce them slowly. She read them at the counter. She read them carefully. The reclassification filing was what she had suspected, an attempt to designate Eastern's boundary markers as disputed on the basis of a secondary survey that, when she checked the date, had been filed 3 weeks before Thomas died. The secondary survey was not signed by a licensed territorial surveyor. It was signed by a representative of Wallace Holdings. She wrote down the statutory references. She wrote down the file and dates. She wrote down the name Marcus Colby, which appeared in the Wallace Holdings documentation as a Kansas City contact for the land transactions. She thanked Pell in the tone she used for situations that required courtesy without warmth and rode home. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with Thomas's law books and a cup of tea that went cold before she thought to drink it. The house was quiet, in the way it had been quiet for 3 weeks and 4 days. Thomas's chair was by the fireplace. His pipe was on the side table where he had left it the last morning. She had not moved these things. She was not sure yet whether not moving them was grief or simply the inertia of a woman who had more pressing concerns than rearranging furniture. She opened his journal. She had been reading it in sections since his death, not from the beginning, but following the threads she needed. Tonight she followed the thread she had started at the county office. She found it in October of the previous year, a full year before his death. Wallace Holdings has acquired 6 parcels along the Willow Creek South Corridor in the past 8 months, all registered as unimproved grazing land. Tax value minimal. I have seen the railroad survey maps from the Territorial Engineering Office. The proposed route for the southern spur runs directly through this corridor. These parcels will be worth 20 times their current value when the route is announced publicly. Someone with access to the railroad survey documents is selling the information. I believe I know who. She read it twice. She turned the page. I should tell Clara. She deserves to know, but if I tell her, she will want to help, and helping means exposure. These men have purchased 6 land parcels to conceal what they know. They will go further than that to protect it. I will handle this through the proper channels first. And further on, 2 weeks later, the proper channels have been compromised. Brennan is aware of the situation. I do not yet know his level of involvement. And then, 3 weeks after that, the entry she had already read. The entry she had been carrying in her chest like a stone since the first morning she found it. Ellie Danner is a good man. Despite what others say, if anything happens to me, he will do right by Clara. I have made certain of it. She closed the journal. She held it against her chest with both hands and looked at the lamp flame. If anything happens to me, he had known. He had documented it, followed it, understood it down to the name of the Kansas City agent. He had known what was coming, and he had made arrangements, and he had not said one word to her. She set the journal on the table. She did not cry. She had not cried since the morning they told her. She had stood in the doorway with the deputy's hat in her hands and listened to the words, and she had felt the grief arrive, and underneath it, moving fast, shameful, impossible to stop before it was already there. One moment of something else entirely, relief. She had been living with that fact for 3 weeks and 4 days. She blew out the lamp and went to bed. In the morning, a second letter arrived from the county office. This one bore Judge Harland's seal. She read it at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee. The territorial property statutes were clear, the letter informed her. A widow holding a solo land claim exceeding 20 acres was required to demonstrate continuous productive management of said property, which required a male co-signatory on the deed within 30 days of formal notice, or the property would revert to the territory. Notice, the letter informed her, was formally given. She read it once. She folded it. She put on her coat. She rode into Harland Creek. The county administrative office occupied the ground floor of the courthouse building. Clara tied her horse at the east post and went in through the ground floor entrance. The clerk looked up. He had been expecting her. She could see it in the way his face organized itself when she came through the door. Not surprise, but the performance of a man settling into a prepared response. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "The judge asked that you come directly up. Then the judge can come down," she said. "I have a question for the Property Records Office." He showed her to the records room. She spent 20 minutes with the survey documents, confirming what she had found the day before. She wrote down what she needed. Then she went upstairs. The chamber door was open. Judge Harland was behind his desk, a large man who had been large for a long time, with a desk proportionate to his opinion of himself. He looked up when she came in. There was someone else already in the room. He was standing at the far wall, not seated, hat in both hands. He had the posture of someone who had been waiting for a while and had settled into the waiting without making a production of it. He was tall, dressed in worn leather and canvas that carried, even across the room, the smell of pine resin and cold weather and something wilder underneath. Dark hair, short beard, eyes that were gray and very still when they found hers, the stillness of a man who has spent a long time in places where noise was a liability. She did not recognize him. She looked at his hands before she looked at his face. Thomas had taught her that, too. Read the hands. The face will show you what a man wants you to see. The hands will show you what he has actually done. His hands were scarred, not the soft scars of domestic accident, the specific scarring of cold country work, rope, rock, weather, tools handled without gloves in conditions that did not accommodate carelessness. The hands of a man who had spent years at the edge of the mapped world. Not a rancher's hands, not a gambler's. Something else. Something she did not yet have a name for. Mrs. Whitmore. Judge Harland said, "I'm glad you came in. This is Eli Danner. He worked your husband's land for the past 2 years. Your husband left him 40 acres in his will. Combined with your holding, the county has determined that a marriage between you and Mr. Danner would satisfy the co-signatory requirement and preserve both land claims intact." She looked at Eli Danner. He looked back at her. His expression gave nothing away. Not sympathy, not discomfort, not interest. Just the careful, level attention of a man who has not yet decided what he thinks about the situation he is standing in. "And when?" Clara said. "Were you planning to ask me?" Harland shifted slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, you are hardly in a position to negotiate," she said. "Yes. I read that language in the letter this morning." She walked to the window and looked at the street below. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Danner privately," she said. They stood in the hallway outside Harland's chamber. Neither of them had chosen this location specifically. Harland had left the room, and they had both moved to the doorway, and the doorway had become the hallway, and the hallway was where the conversation happened. Both of them standing, both of them in their coats, neither of them under any illusion about how much time they had or what the outcome of the conversation was expected to be. Clara looked at him. "You don't want this," she said. "Neither do you." His voice was low, economical, a voice shaped by a lot of time in places where conversation was not the primary activity. "But here we are. Why did you agree to it?" He was quiet for a moment, not the silence of evasion, the silence of a man choosing his words because he means to say exactly what he says. "And nothing else. Your husband gave me work when no one else would," he said. "No questions about where I'd been or what I'd done. Just asked if I could work and told me the terms." He looked at the wall, then back at her. "A man owes something for that. This is how I pay it. By marrying his widow, by keeping her land intact and keeping her safe while I'm at it. He asked me to." Before he died, a pause. "He knew something was coming. Said there were people with interest in the eastern boundary. He made me promise, if anything happened, I'd make sure you weren't left without someone capable standing close." She was quiet. "He never told me," she said. "No, he wouldn't have wanted to worry me." Ellie did not answer that. He looked at the window at the end of the hallway. The quality of his not answering was itself an answer. She looked at him. "My conditions," she said. He waited. "This is a legal arrangement. Business partners under law. Separate rooms. I manage the household. You work the land. Decisions about the ranch are discussed before they are made. I am not property. I will not be managed. As property," she held his gaze, "if you have a view on how things should be run, I want to hear it. But I will hear it, not be informed of it after the fact." He nodded once. "I don't own things that can think for themselves, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. It was a strange way to phrase it, but she understood what he meant. And what he meant was the right thing. She extended her hand. He looked at it for a moment. Not hesitation exactly, more like a man making sure he means to do what he is about to do. Then he took it. His grip was even and firm. She could feel the history of those scars without looking at them. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She started for the stairs, stopped, turned back. "Why do people in this town look at you the way they do?" He met her gaze steadily. "Because they're smart enough to be cautious about what they don't understand." It was not a denial. It was not an explanation. It was something in between that left the door open without walking through it. She went downstairs. The ceremony was on a Tuesday. No flowers. No music. 2 witnesses pulled from the street. A young woman from the dry goods store who kept looking at her shoes, and an elderly man who smelled of tobacco and horses and who had the decency to look at nothing in particular. Reverend Peyton was not there. Clara had not asked him to be. Judge Harland performed the ceremony with the efficiency of a man who considers this category of event a procedural necessity rather than an occasion. He read the statutory language. He asked the requisite questions. Clara answered them in a clear, level voice. Ellie answered them in the same low, economical tone he had used in the hallway. When the judge asked for the ring, Eli produced a plain band from his coat pocket. It had the look of something purchased in a different town, under different circumstances, not new, not worn. He placed it on her finger with the careful, neutral precision of a man completing a practical task. The judge said the closing language before anyone asked her to. Clara extended her hand to Eli. The same handshake as the hallway, the same even grip, but this time it meant something legal, and they both knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. They signed the documents. The 2 witnesses signed. The clerk notarized the page. They were married. They rode back to the ranch in silence. 5 miles of October sky and pale grazing land and cottonwoods along the creek road gone yellow with the season. Not one word between them. Their horses kept the natural spacing of animals that had not yet settled their relationship. Somewhere around the 3rd mile, without apparent intention or self-consciousness, Eli moved his horse slightly to the windward side. A small adjustment he put himself between her and the cold that was coming in off the northern flats. He did not appear to notice he had done it. Clara noticed. She said nothing about it. They reached the ranch as the afternoon light went long and gold across the pasture. She unsaddled her mare and turned her out. He unsaddled his horse and began checking the near fence line. She had seen him do this every evening since he arrived, a systematic walk of the perimeter that she understood now as something other than idle habit. He was reading the property, learning it. The way you learn a country you intend to stay in. She went inside. She made supper. She left half on the table and went to her room and heard him come in, quiet, unhurried, a man who moved through spaces without announcing himself. She heard the far door at the end of the hall. Then silence. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about Thomas's journals and a man who had moved his horse into the wind without knowing she was watching, and the particular quality of his not answering. When she said Thomas wouldn't have wanted to worry her, She thought about what it meant to be protected from a truth. She thought about the letter she had found in October of the previous year's journal entry. I should tell Clara. He had written it. He had known he should. He had decided not to outside. Coyotes called in the dark hills east of the property. A thin, wavering sound that carried a long way in cold air. She listened to it until it stopped. Then she made a decision. In the morning, she would start a second journal. Not Thomas's. Her own names, dates, survey records, land purchases along Willow Creek. The name Marcus Colby, and whatever she could find attached to it. Everything Thomas had known. Everything he had not told her. She was going to find it all. And this time, it was not going to be protected from anyone. There is a particular kind of silence that settles between two people who are learning each other without meaning to. Not hostile silence, not the silence of indifference. Something more specific than both. The silence of two careful people moving through the same small world and noticing, against their better judgment, that the other one is more than the problem they agreed to manage. Clara and Eli Danner spent the first 2 weeks of their marriage in that silence. They ate at the same table. They worked the same land. They passed each other in doorways and said the practical things about fence posts, about feed costs, about the weather coming in off the northern flats. They did not discuss anything that was not necessary. They did not explain themselves to each other. They did not try. And yet, things were observed. Things were filed away that careful people file the details that matter most, quietly, without ceremony, in a place that is not quite the mind and not quite the heart, but lives somewhere between them, the way she checked the window before lighting the evening lamp. Not out of habit, out of attention. The specific, practiced attention of someone who had been taught to know who was coming before they arrived. The way he returned from the north fence one afternoon and went directly to the eastern survey marker without being asked, because something he had read in the mud that morning had told him to. On the 17th morning of their marriage, Clara came back from the eastern fence line with a cut on her right hand. She had been working fast in poor light, trying to reset the last wire tension before full dark, and the wire had caught her wrong, a clean slice across the palm, long enough to need attention, but not deep enough to be an emergency. She rode back to the ranch with her hand wrapped in her bandana and her mind still on the fence post. She had not finished. She treated herself at the kitchen table. No announcement. No call for assistance. She went to the cabinet where the medical supplies were kept, laid out what she needed on the table, and worked through the cleaning and wrapping with the methodical efficiency of someone who had been tending their own body for a long time without help, left-handed throughout. She did not flinch once. Eli came in from the barn while she was finishing the bandage. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her hand. He looked at the supplies laid out on the table. He looked at the calm, unhurried way she was securing the end of the wrap with her teeth and her left thumb. He did not offer to help. He went to the stove. He poured 2 cups of coffee. He set one near her on the table without interrupting what she was doing, and took his own to the far side of the kitchen and looked out the window at the last light on the eastern pasture. She finished the bandage. She flexed the hand once, testing the tension. Then she picked up the coffee. Wire on the 3rd post from the north corner needs rerunning, she said. I'll do it tomorrow, he said. I'd rather do it myself, I know, he said. I'll do it tomorrow. She looked at him over the cup. Something moved across her expression, brief, faint, not quite amusement, but in the same neighborhood. All right, she said. He drank his coffee and looked at the window. That was all. No performance of concern. No negotiation over who had the right to manage what. Just 2 people in a kitchen who had silently and mutually agreed on something important. She was not fragile, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. It was not a romantic moment, but it was, in its way, the first honest one they had shared. 4 days later, Eli said over breakfast. Snow before the week is out. Clara looked at the sky through the kitchen window. It was pale and clear and entirely without cloud. The almanac says 2 more weeks. The almanac didn't watch the horses this morning, he said. He refilled his coffee. And it hasn't been paying attention to the birds. She set down her fork. What about them? They've been moving south for 3 days. Day before yesterday, it was gradual. Yesterday, it was purposeful. This morning, they're gone. He looked out the window. Horses have been standing with their rumps to the northwest since Tuesday afternoon. They know the difference between weather coming and weather already here. She was quiet for a moment. You're reading the animals, she said. The animals know this country better than any almanac does, he said. They always have. A man who pays attention to them doesn't get caught unprepared very often. She thought about that. She thought about Thomas, who had been meticulous about weather records and had consulted the almanac every season with the seriousness of a man consulting a legal precedent. Thomas had never mentioned watching the horses. She stood up and went to get her coat. They spent the better part of that day in preparation. Eli worked the barn, reinforcing the north-facing boards, checking the hay reserves, making sure the water basin would drain before it could freeze and crack. Clara worked the house, recalking the window frames, checking the wood supply, bringing in enough fuel to last 5 days without a trip to the shed. They worked around each other with an efficiency that had not been possible 3 weeks ago. She knew which tasks he had already handled without needing to ask. He knew which sections of the preparation she preferred to manage herself. Neither of them had discussed this division of labor. It had emerged from the daily practice of 2 observant people, sharing a space, the natural, unsentimental organization of people who are good at what they do. The snow came on the 3rd day after Eli's prediction. It came hard and early in the morning, exactly as he had said it would. By noon, the eastern pasture was buried to the fence posts. By afternoon, the temperature had dropped 15 degrees, and the wind was driving the snow sideways across the flats. The ranch weathered it without a single loss. Every animal was sheltered. Every water source had been managed. The woodpile was inside and dry. The roof held on every structure. That evening, Clara stood at the kitchen window and watched the snow come down and thought about almanacs. Thomas had been a good man, careful, methodical. She had been grateful for him the way a person is grateful for a solid structure, genuinely and without passion. But Thomas had consulted almanacs, this man's, had watched the horses. She was not sure yet what to do with the difference. She filed it alongside the coffee and the fence post and the hand in the wind and the particular quality of silence he kept in the doorway of rooms he was waiting to be invited into, the place that did not yet have a name. That same evening, while the storm ran hard outside, Clara opened Thomas's journals at the kitchen table. Not the last entry. She had read that one enough times that she had memorized it without meaning to. She opened earlier, a year back, following the thread she had started at the county office, looking for the shape of what he had known. And when he had known it, she found it laid out with the precision she should have expected from a man who had spent 20 years in law enforcement. Thomas had not suspected the land manipulation. He had documented it entry by entry over a period of 14 months. He had built a case in his small, careful handwriting with dates and names and transaction references and the specific statutory violations, each one represented. He had known about Marcus Colby and the railroad survey access 6 months before he died. He had known about Harland's involvement 4 months before he died. He had known about Brennan 2 months before he died, and 3 weeks before he died, he had written, "I should tell Clara. She deserves to know. But if I tell her, she will want to help, and helping means exposure. I will handle this through the proper channels first." She set the journal down. She looked at the lamp flame. He had been sitting in this chair, at this table, with this lamp, knowing all of it. He had sat across from her at supper and said ordinary things about cattle, prices, and fence repairs, and the condition of the north pasture, and underneath those ordinary things he had been carrying a case that was going to get him killed. She had not known. He had made sure she did not know. She thought about the word, protective. She had always understood it as a quality. Thomas had. Something she was supposed to be grateful for. He was a protective man. He shielded her from difficult things. He managed the complex terrain of county politics and range disputes and the slow criminality of men like Horace Wallace so that she did not have to. She had been grateful for it. She understood now, been profoundly alone inside it. A protected person is not a partner. A protected person is a ward. She closed the journal. She put it on the table beside her own. The second journal, which was growing steadily, names and dates, and her own careful documentation of everything she had found. Outside, the snow ran against the windows. Inside, she heard Eli's footstep in the hallway. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the closed journals on the table, at her hands flat on the surface, at her face, which she kept still, and level the way she kept the sharp still in a crosswind, by attending to the steadiness before anything else. He came in without being asked. He put water in the kettle and set it on the stove and leaned against the counter and did not say anything yet. He was not filling the silence. He was simply occupying the same space, which was a different thing. She said it before she had decided to say it. He knew for over a year. She said. Ellie was quiet. He documented all of it. The land purchases, the railroad survey, Brennan. He had a full account, and he decided not to tell me, and then he rode out alone on a dark road in October, and he didn't come home. She looked at the table. He was trying to protect me. That's what he would have said. He was protecting me from having to know. Ellie did not fill that space either. She had not told anyone what she was about to say. It had been living inside her for 3 weeks and 4 days, and it had gotten heavier each day. She said it because she needed to say it to someone who was present, and this was the only someone who was. When they told me he was dead, she said, before the grief, before anything else, she looked at the lamp flame. I felt relieved. She waited. The kettle made a small sound. The fire ticked. One moment, she said, before the grief came and covered everything. I felt relieved. 8 years of a marriage that was respectful and careful and empty, in the way that a room is empty, even when the furniture is in it. And in that one moment, I felt the weight of it lift, and She stopped. That is the kind of woman I am. That is what I have been living with. Ellie looked at her, an honest one, he said. She looked up. Nothing in his face that was judgment, nothing that was pity, just the plain, level reception of a man who has heard a difficult truth and chosen to receive it as exactly that. A truth, not a verdict. I've done things. I'm not going to dress up as anything other than what they were, he said. You feeling something true for one moment, and then feeling everything else after it. That's not the same category. Not even close. The kettle boiled. He made tea without asking whether she wanted it, and set a cup near her on the table. She drank it. After a while, she asked, "What did you do before you came here?" What kind of history produces the ability to map weak points and red approach angles and know which direction riders came from by looking at bent grass? He looked at the window. I rode with Wade Garrison's operation, he said. 5 years. We hit stages, banks, railroad payroll transfers. I was good at planning the approach. at reading terrain, at calculating response times and identifying exits. He paused. I wasn't pulled into it. I walked in because I was good at it, and it felt like I was built for something. She looked at him. I stayed 2 years past when I should have left, he said. I left after Laredo. What happened? A bank job. The Rangers had been tipped. There was a shootout in the street. A long pause. A girl. She was 6 years old. She was in the wrong place. She took a bullet that was meant for one of ours. And she died in the street while her mother was still reaching for her. He did not look away from the window. The men I rode with stepped over her to get to the horses. I couldn't move. I stood there and I looked at her, and something broke or woke up. I'm not sure which word is right. And when they rode out, I wasn't with them. I took my cut, and I went north, and I spent a year alone in the mountain country before I came down and found work, and eventually found your husband. The storm pressed against the windows. Clara held her cup with both hands and looked at this man, his careful voice, the specific quality of his stillness, the fact that he had watched the horses 3 days ago, and the ranch had not lost a single animal, and she thought about what it cost a person to say the true version of themselves out loud. You've been trying, she said. I've been trying to be useful without being dangerous, he said. Those aren't the same thing, and I haven't always found the line. Nobody does, she said. He looked at her. Nobody finds the line perfectly, she said. That is not a quality exclusive to former outlaws. He was quiet for a moment. You're a strange woman, Mrs. Danner, he said. Clara, she said. He said it, her name, quietly for the first time. And she heard something shift inside it, the way the quality of a familiar sound shifts when it is used for the first time with full intention. They sat in the kitchen until the lamp burned low, not talking much, not needing to. Two people a little lighter than they had been when the evening started. The morning after the storm, Eli came back from the eastern fence line before breakfast. Clara was at the stove when she heard his boots on the porch. A particular rhythm she had learned to read, the difference between the unhurried return of routine work and the deliberate pace of a man who has seen and is deciding what to say about it. He came in and stood near the table. Riders near the eastern marker, he said. 3 horses. Came from the north approach road sometime last night. They walked the fence line between the 2nd and 4th posts and went back the way they came. She turned from the stove. How do you know? He looked at her steadily. Then he went back out. She followed him to the eastern fence corner. He crouched in the mud near the 2nd post and pointed without touching anything. The boot prints were clear in the softened ground. 3 distinct sets, overlapping in some places, spread in others. One set heavier than the other 2. They came from the north and stopped at the post and continued to the next and then turned back. 3 people, she said. 2.5 hours before first light, he said. Mud depth. Relative to the surface freeze. The freeze happened around 4 in the morning, and these prints are below the freeze line. He straightened up. He looked north toward the ridge, where the Wallace property began. They were checking the stakes, making sure they're still there, or documenting that they are. Before filing the next piece of paperwork, he looked at the post, at the iron marker Thomas had set in 1871, still solid in the ground. Someone is building a case on the other side. Every time we document our side, they document theirs. They need to be able to say in court that the markers are ambiguous. She looked at the ridge. She looked at the way he had read the mud, the depth, the freeze line, the weight distribution in the prints. She thought about what school of knowledge produced this specific reading. Not ranching, not surveying. Something older and more mobile than either. Thomas never mentioned a north approach, she said. Most people don't notice it, he said. It comes through the low draw west of the ridge. Harder to see from the house, easier to use if you don't want to be seen from the road. You found it when you walked the property. First week, he said. He looked at the ridge again. Your property has 3 weak approaches. The north draw is the most significant. Whoever has been watching this land knows about it. She thought about men who knew her land's weak approaches before she did. She thought about Thomas's journal, and the phrase, the proper channels have been compromised, and the fact that Marshal Brennan had been mentioned by name. We need to start keeping watch on the north draw, she said. We do, he said, but not visibly. If they know we've identified it, they'll use a different route and we lose the advantage. She looked at him. He was looking at the ridge with the expression of someone making calculations that came to him as naturally as breathing. Threat assessment, approach geometry, response time, likely next move. She filed this alongside everything else. All right, she said. Show me what to watch for, he showed her. Wade Garrison came on a Wednesday afternoon, and he came with 2 riders, and he came without any apparent concern about being seen. Clara spotted them from the eastern fence line, 3 riders on the north approach road, coming at a walk that was too deliberate to be casual and too unhurried to be urgent. She recognized the quality of it, the walk of men who wanted to be observed arriving, who had decided that concealment was beneath their current level of confidence. She rode back to the ranch at a controlled pace and put her mare in the corral and went inside, and took the sharps from its oilcloth. In the corner of the front room, she checked the load. She went to the side window. Illy was already on the porch. He had been in the barn when she came in, and he was on the porch now, which meant he had seen them from the barn and had calculated what she had calculated and had arrived at the porch before she reached the window. He stood at the porch rail, with his hands visible and his posture deliberately easy, not relaxed, but performing relaxation, which was a different and more deliberate thing. The 3 riders stopped at the gate. The man in front pushed back his hat. He was lean, perhaps 40, with the specific look of someone who had spent a long time outdoors, doing things that required him to keep accurate count of everyone in any room he entered. His clothes had been expensive at some point, and were now simply worn, and there was about him the quality of a man who had been everywhere long enough that nowhere surprised him anymore. He looked at Eli with an expression that was almost fond. Well, well, he said. Eli Danner. Heard you'd gone respectable, Wade. Eli's voice was entirely flat. You're a long way from Texas? Following opportunity, the man said. Always been my nature. He looked at the house, his eyes moving across the windows with the attentiveness of someone cataloging the geometry. Heard about a sweet little setup out here. Sheriff's widow with good land, and then word comes that she up and married herself a man I used to know. Had to see it. You've seen it, Eli said. Move on. That's no way to treat old friends. Wade leaned forward slightly in his saddle. We rode together. Eli, Amarillo. The stage outside Fort Worth. You weren't so high-minded then. That was a different life. Was it? Because the way I remember it. Wade paused, and in the pause was something calculated, a weight being placed deliberately. You didn't just ride along. You were the one who mapped the approach, timed the response windows, told us where every deputy in the county would be standing, and why. Another pause. That kind of mind doesn't get a different life. It just finds a new application. In the house, at the side window, Clara heard that sentence. She heard map the approach and timed the response windows, and she filed it in the same careful place she filed everything, alongside the boot prints and the north draw, and the defensive map he had drawn from memory in his first week on her property. She looked at the back of Eli's head on the porch. He had not denied it. Wade kept talking. About Laredo, about a code, about debts that didn't expire because a man decided he was tired of them. He talked in the easy, practiced way of someone who has had this conversation before in his head and knows where all the exits are. Then he looked directly at the window where Clara was standing. "Your wife's listening," he said to Eli. "She should hear this. She married something that's going to follow her husband around like a shadow she didn't ask for." He looked at Eli 1 week. "You think about what you owe and how you want to square it." "I'll be in the county." He wheeled his horse. His riders went with him. They rode back up the north approach road at the same deliberate walk, making a show of the departure, making the message of it unmistakable. "I am not afraid of you. I will come back." Ellie stood on the porch until they were over the ridge and gone. Clara waited 30 seconds after the last rider disappeared. Then she set the sharps against the wall and went outside. He was still looking north at the place where the riders had been. "You planned them," she said. He turned to look at her. "The jobs," she said. "Amarillo, Fort Worth." He said, "You mapped the approaches, timed the responses. You weren't just riding along. You were the operational mind of it." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. How many?" "3 confirmed. A 4th where I gave information but wasn't present for the execution." She was quiet. She looked at the north ridge. She looked at the defensive map she had been studying with him for 2 weeks, the map of her property, with its approach angles and weak points and the specific detail of the north draw that most people had never noticed. She looked back at him. "The plan you drew for this property," she said. "The approach angles, the sight lines, the position above the eastern draw." "Same skills," he said. "Different purpose. Is the plan good?" He looked at her directly. "Yes." "Then we use it," she said. She turned toward the house. He said, "Clara," she stopped. "I didn't tell you because I was waiting for the right moment," he said. "Then I decided the right moment didn't exist and I should just have told you from the beginning." "I'm sorry I didn't." She looked at him for a moment, at his hands, at the gray eyes that gave away very little, but gave away this, that he meant it. "Come inside," she said. "I want to go over the plan again with what I know about where they were, standing when they watched the north fence last week." He followed her inside. They spread the map on the kitchen table. She showed him what she had observed from the eastern fence. He showed her 2 adjustments the new information suggested. They worked together with the quiet efficiency of people who have been doing this long enough that the collaboration has become natural. It was not until afterward, when the map was folded and the supper things were on the table, that Clara understood what had just happened. She had heard the worst thing about him, the true extent of it, not the softened version, the operational mind behind the Amarillo Bank and the Fort Worth stage, not just a man who rode along with bad people, but the man who made the bad things work. And her first question had been, "Is the plan good?" Not because she was indifferent to what he had been, but because she had understood, in the moment of hearing it, that the same quality of mind that had planned those jobs was the quality of mind that was keeping her property and her household from being dismantled by men who had been planning their own operation for 2 years. You used what was true. You didn't wait for things to be simpler than they were. Thomas had taught her that about shooting. She was beginning to think it applied to more than shooting. Sam had been in the barn for 3 nights before anyone addressed it. Ellie found him the first time on a Tuesday, coming back late from the north fence, where he had been checking the approaches after finding new marks in the mud near the draw. He raised the lantern in the barn doorway, and the light found a small shape in the far corner of the hay, curled against the cold, already asleep. A boy, 9 or 10 years old maybe. Coat too thin for the temperature, worn boots, a carpet bag tucked under his knees, as though he expected someone might take it. Eli stood in the doorway for a long time. He had seen this before, not this specific child, not this specific barn. but the shape of it, the way the boy had positioned himself in the furthest corner from the door, with his back against the wall and his face toward the entrance and the carpetbag pulled close. That was the position of a child who had learned that the safest place to sleep was one that gave the maximum warning before trouble arrived. He knew that shape because he had lived it a long time ago, in a different state, in a different barn, behind a different kind of silence. He lowered the lantern. He went back inside. Wednesday morning, before he started work, he put food on the south fence post, biscuits from the morning, a piece of dried beef, a cup of water with a cloth over the top. By noon, the post was empty. Wednesday night, the boy was in the barn again. Thursday morning, food on the fence post, same as before. This time, a folded blanket beside it. Gone by midday, Clara found the second empty plate on Friday morning near the fence post with the folded blanket gone. She stood looking at it for a moment. She looked at Eli, who was checking the corral fence and not looking at her. She went to the back door of the house. She opened it. She did not call out loudly, just at the level of ordinary conversation, directed toward the general direction of the barn. The way you call to someone you know is probably within hearing. There is coffee on the stove, she said, and it is too cold to be eating outside. 30 seconds. Then Sam Carter came around the corner of the barn. He was perhaps 9 years old, perhaps 10, the kind of age that is hard to read on a child who has not had enough food or sleep for long enough that his body has stopped being a reliable indicator. He had green eyes and a face that had been making adult assessments for years. He held the carpetbag with both hands in the way of someone who has had things taken before and intends to minimize the opportunity. He stopped when he saw Clara standing in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the open door. He looked back at her with the specific wariness of a boy, running a calculation about probability. "I don't want charity," he said. "I know," she said. "Come in anyway." He came in. He sat at the kitchen table and put both hands around the cup she gave him and ate everything she put in front of him without being asked twice about any of it. She did not interrogate him. She moved around the kitchen and let him be, which was the correct instinct for a child who had been watched with unfriendly attention for most of his life. When the plate was empty, she sat across from him. "Sheriff Whitmore," he said before she asked. "He came to the orphanage, brought books, showed me numbers, said I reminded him of someone. He looked at the table. He told me a month before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should come to the ranch. Said his wife would understand. Clara was still. The orphanage burned down 2 weeks ago, Sam said. 3 children dead, he told her, in the same matter-of-fact voice of a child who has been processing catastrophe without the benefit of adult mediation for too long. He had gotten out through a back window. He had walked to Harland Creek and then walked out of it when no one there had seemed inclined to be useful to a 10-year-old with nowhere to go. He had found the ranch by following Thomas's directions, which had been specific enough to be useful. Ellie came in from outside while Sam was finishing the account. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. His hand moved toward the porch rail, a small reflexive gesture, and then he registered that the figure at the table was a child, and he went still. He looked at Sam. Sam looked at him with the careful assessment of a boy who had learned not to make assumptions about large, quiet men. Ellie looked at Sam's coat, at the carpetbag, at the way the boy had positioned his chair so his back was to the wall. He looked at Clara. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything, but something passed between them in the silence, a shared recognition, a mutual decision arrived at without discussion. Ellie took off his coat and hung it by the door. He went to the stove. He poured coffee. He sat down at the far end of the table, not close, just present. You walked here from town, he said. Yes, sir, Sam said. How many days? 2.5. You know the country south of the creek? Sam nodded. I came through it at night, mostly. The low ground east of the draw. Ellie looked at him. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but its precondition. A man recognizing something he respects. There's a section of the eastern approach the survey map has wrong, Eli said. The creek line. I've been meaning to correct it. He looked at the table. If you know that ground, you might be able to tell me where the error is. Sam looked at him with the specific expression of a child who is being treated as though his knowledge is worth something and does not yet entirely trust that this is real. Maybe, Sam said carefully. Come find me after supper, Eli said. He stood up, took his coffee, and went back out. Clara watched Sam watch the door close. He's not what I expected, Sam said quietly. No, Clara said, he isn't. She refilled the boy's coffee and went back to the stove. Outside through the window, she could see Eli at the corral fence, working the latch that had needed adjusting for a week and that she had been meaning to get to. He had not mentioned it. He was simply fixing it now, in the way he did things, without announcement in the available time, because it needed doing. She thought about Thomas's journal. If something happens to me, I hope Clara will do right by him. Thomas had been right about Eli. He had been right about this too. She thought about what it meant to be trusted to know something, even if the trusting came after the fact, even if the person doing the trusting was gone. She thought, I will do right by him. Then she started supper, because the day was moving on, and there was work that needed doing. And a boy at her kitchen table who looked, for the first time since he had come around the corner of the barn, like someone who might be willing to stay. 2 weeks after, Sam arrived. Eli spread his property maps on the kitchen table on a Saturday evening. He had been meaning to correct the creek line in the southeastern corner since the first week. The survey document had it running 2 inches east of where it actually ran. A small error that would not matter in most circumstances and might matter considerably in a legal dispute about boundary markers. He had walked that ground himself. He knew where the error was. But he had not yet walked the full southeast approach with enough detail to correct the secondary lines. Sam was at the table doing his reading primer when Eli unrolled the map. The boy looked up. He looked at the map with the focused interest of someone who has been navigating unfamiliar country in the dark for 2 weeks and has developed opinions about cartography. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he put his finger on the creek line. This bends wrong, he said. Ellie looked at him. Right here, Sam said. He moved his finger 2 inches east on the map. It bends here, not where you have it. How do you know? Eli asked. I came through it, Sam said, nights. I crossed the creek at the bend both times, going out to check if anyone was on the south road, and coming back. He looked at the map with the careful certainty of a boy who has learned to trust his spatial memory because in his recent experience it was the most reliable thing he had. I know where I crossed. Eli studied the map. He picked up his pencil. Show me the whole route. Sam traced it. From the south approach, through the creek crossing, up the eastern draw, along the low ground to the barn. A cross-country route that followed the terrain rather than any established road. A route that a person would only know if they had traveled it in the dark on foot, paying close attention to the ground. Eli made 3 corrections to the creek marking. He studied the adjusted line. He made a 4th small correction, the draw. East of the second fence post, he said. Is there a low spot about 20 yards from the marker? A depression, maybe 6 inches deep, runs roughly north to south? Sam thought about it. Yes, I went around it on the north side. The ground was soft. That's where the spring runs underground. In wet years, Eli said. He made a notation on the map. It won't show on the survey documents, but it means the soil in surveys. That section is unstable for fence posts. Thomas had that corner post set too shallow. It'll shift when the ground heaves in spring. Sam looked at the map. He looked at Eli's pencil moving across it. Can I see? He asked. Eli turned the map toward him. Clara was at the stove with her back to both of them. She did not turn around. She listened to Eli's voice, patient, specific, treating the boy's observations as data, worth incorporating rather than as the uncertain contributions of a child. And she thought about what Thomas had written. He deserves better than what life has given him. Yes, she thought, he does. The day before the mill meeting, Clara and Eli rode the Willow Creek corridor. She had been wanting to do this since she first found the survey reclassification at the county office. To see the land itself, not just its paper representation. To stand in the scrubland along the south corridor and look at what Horace Wallace had been acquiring in parcels at prices that made no sense. Unless you knew something, the sellers did not. They rode out before the frost had fully lifted from the grass. The Willow Creek parcels were exactly what the land records described. Scrubland, thin soil over hardpan, sparse grass and scattered brush, a few gnarled cottonwoods, along the creek itself, their roots, finding the water that the surface gave no indication of. Nothing that would sustain a cattle operation of any meaningful size. Nothing that would attract investment from anyone with ordinary intentions and ordinary information. But the land lay flat, extraordinarily flat, for this part of the territory. The corridor ran straight for miles, without a significant grade change, following the creek's ancient path through country that was otherwise uneven and difficult. Clara dismounted at the second parcel boundary and walked the fence line. Eli stayed on his horse, reading the terrain from elevation. Not the scrubland itself, but the shape of the country around it, the way it sat in the broader landscape. 40 miles, he said, maybe more. From the northern county line all the way to the Coyote Springs Junction, following this corridor, a track could run without a single significant grade. No cuts required, no fills. The engineering cost would be a fraction of any alternative route. She looked at the survey stakes. They were new. The wood was unstained, clean, the kind of fresh that meant weeks, not months. She crouched beside the nearest one and examined the notation markings. Territorial engineering survey format. Notation change she had seen in the records Thomas had referenced in his journal. She stood up. He stood here, she said. Yes, he came out here, and he walked this ground, and he read the same stakes, and then he went back to town, Eli said, and he tried to use the proper channels. She looked at the ridge to the north, at the Wallace property line, which she could identify from the older, weathered stakes that marked it. They were riding back when Eli said, without urgency, "Rider, on the northeast ridge. He's been there since we crossed the creek. He's not following. He's watching." Clara kept her eyes forward. Wallace's man, or Harland's. The distinction matters less than it used to. He adjusted his horse's angle slightly, a minimal change that put his body between her and the ridge. He wants to know. We were here. He wants to be able to report it. Then they know about the mill meeting, she said. Probably. She thought about that. She thought about a man with a paper that had Thomas's signature on it, and a rider on a ridge, watching her walk. The ground Thomas had walked before he died. They'll try to move before tomorrow night, she said. They might, he said, which means tonight we need to be visible and unremarkable, somewhere in town where 60 people can confirm. We were doing nothing unusual, she thought about it. Morrison's, I need supplies anyway, and Sam? The Hendersons, she said. He's been there before for the schoolwork evenings. It won't draw attention. Ellie nodded. He did not elaborate on the plan, or suggest alternatives or add conditions. He simply accepted the thinking as sound, which it was. They rode home and prepared for the evening. They rode into Harland Creek that afternoon in the ordinary way. Not together exactly, but not separated either. The natural proximity of two people who have been moving in coordination long enough that it has stopped requiring effort. Morrison's general store. Dry goods, lamp oil, a new file for the fence work, 2 pounds of coffee, ordinary purchases made at the ordinary pace of a woman, conducting a routine errand on a Thursday afternoon. Clara spoke to Mrs. Morrison at the counter about the price of calico and the reliability of the last seed shipment and the condition of the South Road after the recent weather. Mrs. Morrison answered, in the way of a woman who was genuinely uncertain what she thought about the person she was talking to, and had decided that ordinary conversation was the safest position, while she continued deciding. Eli stood near the door and said nothing, which was unremarkable, because Eli Danner never said much in Morrison's general store, and the town had stopped expecting him to. Garrett was at the end of the counter. He looked up when they came in. He gave Clara the specific nod she had come to recognize, not the vague acknowledgement of social obligation, but the deliberate nod of a man who had taken off his hat at the feed store lot 6 weeks ago and had been consistent about what that gesture meant ever since. She nodded back. Cole Briggs came in while she was waiting for Morrison to wrap the dry goods. He came in alone, without the usual accompaniment of the group he moved with, and he moved through the door with the new quality of self-consciousness he had been carrying for 6 weeks, the specific awkwardness of a young man in the process of reconstructing his understanding of himself, and not yet certain what it was going to look like when finished. He stopped when he saw Clara. He looked at the shelf of tobacco tins. He looked at his boots. He looked at the ceiling. Then he looked at her with the expression of someone who has been rehearsing something and has decided that rehearsing it further will not improve it. Mrs. Danner, he said. Mr. Briggs, she said. He opened his mouth. He started over. I was out of line. At the feed lot. That was, he stopped. I was out of line, and I knew it before you fired, and I knew it after. And I should have said so sooner. She looked at him. 24 years old, broad across the shoulders. Something fundamental had broken in him 6 weeks ago, and he was in the particular, uncomfortable stage of learning what to build in its place, which was the only stage that produced anything real. Come to the south fence post on Tuesday morning, she said. He blinked. Ma'am, early. Before breakfast, she looked at Morrison, who had finished wrapping the goods. If you want to learn the thing you didn't know you were missing, Tuesday morning is when I'm there. Cole stared at her for a moment. Then he nodded. Quickly, slightly bewildered, the nod of a man accepting something he does not entirely understand. She paid for the supplies. She and Eli rode home. Sam went to the Hendersons. Clara checked the second journal. She checked the Sharps. She went to bed at the usual time and lay in the dark, and went over what she knew about the mill outside Coyote Springs and what Wade Garrison was likely to want from the conversation and what she was prepared to give. She was ready. The old mill outside Coyote Springs had not turned a wheel in 9 years. The wheel had cracked in the third hard winter after it was built, a long split in the lower third that had widened with each freeze until one spring morning it had simply stopped turning, and the man who owned it had looked at the cost of repair, and the cost of replacement, and the state of his finances, and had boarded up the windows and gone to do something else. The building itself was still sound. Stone walls thick enough to hold warmth and block wind. A warped door that opened with effort. East and west windows that meant, at dusk, the interior was shadowed and the approach road was lit. Ely had identified this geometry before they left the ranch. He had also identified the draw to the south, a natural depression in the land, deep enough and long enough that a rider could position themselves within it with clear sight lines to the mill door and the north approach road without being visible from either. He went into the draw. Clara rode to the mill alone and tied her horse at the post and went inside. The interior smelled of old wood and cold stone, and the particular emptiness of a space that had been useful and wasn't any more. She stood near the west window and looked at the road and waited. Wade Garrison arrived early. He came from the south road, not the north, which told her he had mapped the draw before he arrived, and had deliberately chosen an approach that announced this knowledge. He was telling Eli, "I know you're there. I'm not pretending otherwise." He came alone. He tied his horse and came inside and looked at her in the low western light with an expression that was more complex than she had expected from a man of his stated occupation. "You look like him sometimes," he said. "Thomas," around the eyes. "You knew him," she said. "Not well. He arrested one of my men in '69, treated him decently, which is rarer than it should be in this territory." He looked around the mill interior, cataloging exits, sight lines, distances, with the same automatic assessment she had come to recognize in Eli. "Your husband is in the draw." "Yes, good." He reached into his inside coat pocket. He produced a folded paper. He held it, but did not give it to her yet. "I want to tell you how I came to have this before I give it to you. The how changes what it means." She waited. 3 months before Thomas died, Wade said. "He came to find me. Rode out to where I was camped north of the county line. Alone. No badge visible, no deputies. Just him and a horse and 3 years of careful documentation in a saddlebag." He looked at the paper in his hands. He had the full case. Land purchases, railroad survey access, the names of the county officials involved, the specific statutory violations, everything he needed for a territorial court except one thing. "A witness outside the county," she said. "A transaction record that Brennan couldn't intercept," he said. He knew everything that had happened inside Harland Creek. He needed something that had happened outside it. He thought, "I might have seen a piece of it." "Had you?" "Some. Not enough on its own." He turned the paper over in his hands. But that's not what mattered. What mattered was that he came back a second time. With a different proposition, he held out the paper. She took it. The paper was a single page, Thomas's handwriting, the small, precise hand she had been reading for 8 years in journals and letters and notes left on the kitchen table. She recognized it before she read the words. A formal agreement, dated August 14, 1875, 3 months before his death. She read it slowly. Thomas Whitmore agreed to cease all investigation into the Willow Creek land transactions and to make no further inquiries into the conduct of county officials regarding the railroad survey documentation. He agreed to destroy all evidence in his possession relating to these matters. He agreed to provide no testimony, written or oral, to any territorial authority regarding the individuals named in his investigation. In exchange, the parties to this agreement would ensure the safety and continued security of Clara Whitmore and her land claim in the event of any unforeseen change in circumstances, regret Mr. Whitmore's continued tenure as county sheriff. Unforeseen change in circumstances. The language of men who had already decided what the circumstances were going to be. She read it again. She read it a third time. Thomas had known. He had known. They were going to kill him, or had understood that the probability was high enough to plan around. He had looked at the situation and seen that his evidence was not sufficient to act on quickly enough, that the proper channels were compromised, that the men he was investigating had both the motive and the means to remove him before he could complete the case. And he had traded. He had traded 3 years of documentation, the full case, everything he had built, for a guarantee that Clara would be left alone. He had given them the thing that threatened them in exchange for a promise that they would not threaten her. They had accepted the terms, then they had killed him anyway. She stood in the old mill, in the low western light, and held the paper in both hands, and felt the full weight of what her husband had done, and what it had cost him, and what it had not been able to buy. She heard Wade's voice. He wasn't stupid, Wade said. He understood the probability, but it was the only card he had left that they wanted badly enough to trade for. He played it because the alternative was leaving you with nothing, no legal protection, no land claim, no arrangement, just a widow, in a territory where widows without protection don't stay widows. Long before someone takes what they had. She did not speak. He loved you in the way he knew how, Wade said, which wasn't enough, but it was the only way he had. She looked up from the paper. He could have told me, she said. Wade looked at her steadily. Could he? Would you have let him make that trade? Step back from the investigation, hand over the evidence. Just wait. She held his gaze. She could not answer. Not honestly. The honest answer was no. She would not have let him. She would have found another way, tried to, fought it, and in fighting it she might have made everything worse, and he had known that, and made the calculation himself, and kept her in the dark, because he understood her well enough to know that her response to the stop him would have been to try to stop him. He had protected her from herself. He had got it wrong, but he had known her. He could have told me, she said again. Quieter this time, not an argument, just the plain permanent fact of it, which she needed to say one more time before she let it go. Wade said, yes. He let the silence sit. Then, the paper's yours. There's a name in the bottom margin. Marcus Colby, railroad agent, Kansas City. He's the connection between the survey documentation and the county. That name, the land purchase records, and the timing of the survey announcement is what a territorial court needs. Why are you giving me this? He looked at her for a long moment. Because I'm tired, he said, simply, not performing the statement, not looking for a reaction to it, just a man saying a true thing about himself. 20 years of this, and the exits keep closing, and the faces in the gang keep getting younger, and I stopped sleeping through the night about 3 years ago, and I've been trying to figure out for a long time whether a man can actually get out of something like this, or whether the getting out is just a story that men like Eli tell themselves when they find a quiet place to stop for a while. He looked at the mill wall. I haven't figured it out yet, he said, but I figured that if I was leaving the territory anyway, I might as well go useful. He reached into his coat and produced a second smaller paper. The Kansas City transaction. Payment from Harland's account to Colby. I held it back because I wasn't sure I'd use it. Take it. If the case goes to trial, Colby's lawyers will argue the Kansas City side isn't documented. This documents it. She took the second paper. I want one thing, he said. Not from Eli. From you. If I ride south tonight, and I keep riding, I want to know nobody's coming after me. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what justice meant in a territory where the law had been purchased, and what it meant to extend it to a man who had done what Wade Garrison had done, and was now standing in an old mill with papers that might finish what her husband had started. If you leave tonight, she said, and you don't come back, we have no interest in where you've gone. He looked at her. Then he nodded. Once, a small settling gesture, like something being closed. Use the paper, he said. Thomas deserved better than what happened to him. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the warped wood. He was right about Danner, he said, without turning around. Whatever else he got wrong, he was right about that. He went out. She heard his horse on the road. She heard the sound fade south. She stood in the old mill for a while, holding both papers, feeling the cold stone around her, and the October dark coming in through the west window, and the specific weight of a thing that had been missing and was now found and could not be unfound. And she heard Eli's horse from the direction of the draw. She went outside. He pulled up and looked at her face in the dusk light. He read it the way he read terrain. Without asking for a guide, just receiving the information as it was, she held up the papers. He dismounted and took them and read them both in the last of the light. She watched his face move through the content, the methodical, careful reading of a man who is extracting specific information and filing it in the correct place. He gave them back. He did not say anything immediately. He looked at the dark hills and the first stars over them, and the road going south where Wade had gone. Then he tried. He got it wrong. She said, "Yes." She folded both papers along their existing creases and put them in her inside coat pocket. She looked at the hills. "He could have trusted me with it," she said. One more time, soft, final, not bitter. The last time she was going to say it, she thought, because it had been said enough. Ellie looked at her. "For what it's worth," he said. "I would have trusted you with it if it had been mine to tell." She held his gaze in the falling dark. Then she mounted her horse. "Let's go home," she said. They rode back through the cold night with the papers against her heart, and the stars overhead, and the smell of wood smoke meeting them half a mile from the ranch. She saw the kitchen window from the crest of the last hill. The lamp was burning. Sam had left it burning. She had not asked him to. She had not suggested it. He had simply lit it, deaf, before he went to the Hendersons, because he was a boy who had been sleeping in a barn 3 weeks ago, and who had decided, without making an announcement of it, that this was home. She looked at the light in the window for a moment before they rode down. Then she rode down. Judge Harland called the meeting on a Monday. The notice was posted outside the courthouse, an open forum for Harland Creek residents to address community security concerns following recent incidents of violence in the county. The language was civic and measured. The intent was visible to anyone who had been paying attention. He was building a public record. He needed a documented community concern about the Danner household before his next legal move. He needed witnesses who could later testify that there had been legitimate public worry about the situation, the criminal history, the violence at the property, the unsuitability of the environment for vulnerable members of the community. Sam was the vulnerable member. Clara read the notice on Saturday morning and understood all of it within the first reading. She told Eli that evening. He read the notice. He set it on the table. "He's moving faster than I expected. He knows we went to the mill," she said. "He knows Wade gave us something. Then he needs to get ahead of whatever we have." "Yes." She picked up the notice and set it back down. "We're going." Ellie looked at her. "Both of us," she said. "We walk in and we sit down, and we let him build the case in front of the whole town. And then I put the journal on the table." "The paper is already on its way to Santa Fe," she said. She had sent it with Cole Briggs 3 days after the mill meeting. Cole had ridden south without being asked why he was going, and had returned 4 days later, thinner and tired, and had said only that the package had been received by the correct office and signed for by name. The telegraph at the county station had confirmed it the following morning. Harland did not know about Cole Briggs. He knew about the mill. He did not know about a Tuesday morning fence post student who had ridden hard to Santa Fe with a sealed package. "Whatever he does with what I put on that table," she said, "it won't change what's already in Santa Fe." Sam looked up from his homework at the end of the table. "Are you going to fight?" "Not physically," Clara said. "Not physically," Eli said at exactly the same moment. Sam looked between them. He went back to his homework. The council chambers held 63 people on Monday evening. Harland Creek had been waiting for something to break open since Thomas died. It had been waiting through the courthouse marriage and the whispers about Eli Danner's past and the attack on the ranch and the arrest of Harland's associates in the land fraud case that was just beginning to be understood. 63 people came because they had been waiting, and this was apparently the night Clara and Eli walked in together. The conversations went through the specific sequence. Normal level, then quieter, then the particular held-breathed silence of a room that has noticed something and is deciding how to respond to it. They found 2 chairs in the back row and sat down. Judge Harland, at the raised counsel table, looked at them once. Then he looked at the papers in front of him and did not look at them again, which was itself a kind of statement. The meeting was called to order. Harland spoke first. He was good at this. 30 years of rooms where words were the primary instrument had given him the specific skill of making a case sound like a concern, making a strategy sound like a worry, making a targeted action sound like a civic responsibility. He spoke about stability and community standards and the particular challenges of frontier territory, still finding its shape. He did not use names. He did not need. 3 other speakers followed. The language was careful throughout. Documented criminal history, household unsuitable for vulnerable individuals, legitimate community, concern about the welfare of a minor currently residing in circumstances that had produced multiple violent incidents. Sam. Every word of it was aimed at Sam. Clara sat through it, without shifting in her seat, and without changing her expression, and without looking away from the counsel table. She listened the way she read terrain, not for what was being said on the surface, but for what was being built underneath it. When the floor was opened for comment, she stood up. She did not make a speech. She walked to the counsel table. She set the second journal on the surface, open face up, the page she had marked 3 days ago. Page 14, names, dates. 6 land purchases along the Willow Creek corridor over 22 months. The Wallace Holdings registration records. The financing sourced through a Kansas City Railroad agent whose name appeared in the territorial governor's office. Documentation that had been received and signed for the previous week. The documentation on this page, she said, corresponds to records already in the possession of the territorial governor's office. She did not raise her voice. She spoke at conversation level, clearly, facing the council table. Any action taken by this council or its members against my household, my land claim, or the child currently in my care will be reviewed in that context by the territorial circuit. She looked at Harland. The governor's office has the primary documents. Whatever you do with this room tonight, you are doing it with that already. On record. She closed the journal. She picked it up. She walked back to her chair and sat down. Harland Hart had gone through several things while she was speaking. His face had moved through calculation and reassessment and arrived at a quality of stillness that was not calm. It was the stillness of a man running numbers very fast. And not finding results he liked, he started to speak. That document is already in Santa Fe, she said from the back of the room without standing up. Whatever you do with this, one doesn't change that. The room was very quiet. Ellie, beside her, did not look at the counsel table. He looked at the wall, but under the seat, not visible to anyone watching, his hand found hers for 3 seconds. Not romantic, not tentative. The specific, even pressure of a man communicating something he has no words for and does not need. She held it for 3 seconds. Then she let it go. The meeting continued for 20 more minutes. The speakers who followed were less certain. The language became the careful language of people who are revising a position without wanting to be seen revising it. Harland called the meeting to a close earlier than the posted agenda. Outside, Afterward, in the cold evening air, Garrett was waiting at the bottom of the steps. "You know what you've done," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's not a small thing to take on." "No." He looked at her with the long, accurate look of a man who has been keeping an honest account of events for a very long time. "Thomas used to say," he said, "that the best shot he ever knew was the one who waited longer than anyone else before pulling the trigger." He settled his hat on his head. He was talking about more than shooting. He walked off toward the livery. Cole Briggs was at the edge of the dispersing crowd. He had come to the meeting. He had said nothing during it and done nothing except stand where he was standing and watch. When Clara passed him on the way to the horses, he gave her a nod that was different from every nod that had come before it. Not apology, not the nod of a young man performing contrition, the nod of someone who has decided. She nodded back. 3 days after the council meeting, Judge Harland filed the motion. It came by official courier to the ranch, a sealed document with the county seal, and Harland's signature, and language that was precise and practiced and as cold as the November wind coming under the kitchen door. The motion sought to remove Samuel Carter from the Danner household on grounds of moral unsuitability. It cited documented violence at the property. It cited the known criminal history of Eli Danner. It cited a firearm found accessible to a minor during an official law enforcement visit. It cited the community concerns raised at the Monday evening meeting, which had now been formally entered into the county record. Clara read it at the kitchen table alone. She read it once. She read it again. She read it again. She folded it and put it in her coat pocket. Sam was at school. Eli was on the north fence. She sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Then she got up and went to find Eli. He was at the third post from the corner, replacing a rail that had cracked in the last frost. She rode up. She dismounted. She gave him the document without saying anything first. He read it. He set it on the fence post. He looked at the hills. "He knows we won't run," he said. "Yes." "So he goes for Sam." Yes, he was quiet. She watched him hold the control over something that was not controlled underneath. A man who had learned to be still in the way that wilderness requires being still, because breaking cover at the wrong moment costs you more than staying still does. "What do we do?" he said. "Not quite a question. Cole already delivered the package," she said. "But the governor, as the governor's office needs time to act, and Harlan knows the gap. He can move on Sam faster than Santa Fe can move on him." "How do we close the gap, Margaret?" she said. "She boards with Mrs. Talbert. She hears things. If Talbert has anything in her household records about Harlan and Colby, any documentation, any correspondence, it would help build the case against any counter-move on Sam." She looked at him. "But she's already taken risk for us." "That's her decision," he said. "Not ours to make for her." He picked up his tools. He went back to the fence rail. She watched him work. She thought about Sam at school right now, sitting in the front row, because Margaret had found. He paid better attention there, probably unaware that his name was on a legal document in her coat pocket. A 10-year-old who had spent 4 years in an orphanage where the adults who were supposed to protect him were the ones who hurt him, who had walked 2.5 days to a ranch he had only been told about, who had been sleeping in a barn for 3 nights before anyone brought him inside, who had been calling her name in conversation for 2 weeks. Not Mrs. Danner, not ma'am, not the careful formalities of a child managing adult distance, but Clara. Her name, used the way a person uses the name of someone they have decided to trust. She looked at the hills. "He asked me last week," she said. Ellie paused, whether they were going to take him away. She looked at the fence line. "I told him we were working on it." He said, "That means maybe." Ellie set down the hammer. He looked at the fence post for a moment. "Tell him tonight," he said. "Tell him the maybe is getting smaller, is it?" "Yes," he said. "It is." He picked up the hammer. He drove the nail. Margaret Wells came to the ranch that evening. She rode out alone, which Eli noted without comment, because by now he had read Margaret Wells well enough to understand that she did everything with more quantity calculation than it appeared, and that riding out alone was a choice she had made. For reasons she had thought through, she came in and sat at the kitchen table with the specific expression of a woman who has overheard something important and assessed the risk of sharing it and made the decision before she arrived. She told them what she had found. Mrs. Talbert kept a household diary in the parlor. Margaret had read the relevant entries on 2 separate occasions when Talbert had left the room. The name Marcus Colby did not appear, but the name of a Kansas City banking house did, the same banking house that appeared in the transaction document Wade had given Clara at the mill, and the dates of Talbert's dinner meetings with Harland corresponded precisely with the dates of the Willow Creek land purchases in the county record. Not proof, Natus, but connection, the kind of connection that a territorial attorney could use to establish a pattern. The orphan court filing, Margaret said. He's preparing a second motion through Broderick's court. It bypasses the territorial circuit entirely. Local magistrate, local hearing, decided before Santa Fe can intervene. Timeline? Eli said. A week. Maybe less. Clara looked at the journal. The governor's response could take 2 more weeks, Eli said. The gap was clear between them. 1 week on Harland's side, 2 weeks on theirs. A week of exposure in which Sam had no legal protection, and a motion working its way through a court controlled by men who had already decided. Margaret said she could slow the orphan court filing. She had been managing Mrs. Talbert's understanding of the situation carefully for 2 weeks, and Talbert was genuinely uneasy. She had not understood. When she began attending Harland's dinners, what she was part of, and now that she was beginning to understand it, she was looking for a position that did not require her to be fully implicated. Margaret could use that. It puts you at risk, Clara said. I've been at risk since I came to this town, Margaret said. She said it plainly, without drama, the way a person states a fact they have made peace with. I was at risk before I came to this town. I chose to be here. That means I chose everything that comes with it. She rode out. An hour later, Clara and Ely told Sam that night. He was at the table with his primer when she sat down across from him. She told him, simply and directly, the motion, what it claimed, what it meant, and what they were doing about it. She did not soften it into something easier to hear. He had been managing the real world without softening for 4 years, and he deserved the truth in plain language. He listened without interrupting. Then, can they do it? Take me? They're trying, she said. We're working on making sure they can't. How? Documentation, Eli said from the doorframe. The same way any fight is won when you can't use your fists. You build a paper record the law can't argue with. Sam looked at him. And if the paper record isn't fast enough? Ellie looked back at him steadily. Then anyone who tries to remove you from this property has to go through both of us to do it. Sam looked at the table. He looked at Clara. He looked at the primer. I'm not going back, he said, not with heat. With the quiet conviction of someone who has made a decision they have no intention of revisiting. No, Clara said. You're not. He went back to the primer. Eli pushed off the doorframe and poured coffee and said nothing else. Clara went to the stove. Sam read his primer. The evening went on in the ordinary way. Supper, the cleared table, Sam's lamp burning in his room, and in the ordinary way. It covered what was underneath it, which was 3 people who had decided something without saying it. The way decisions are made when they are real. The attack came on a Friday evening at dusk. Clara saw them from the kitchen window. 7 riders on the north approach road, coming at the unhurried walk of professionals who have been doing this long enough to know that rushing announces you, Eli, she said. He was already at the window. He looked at the riders. He looked at the remaining daylight. 40 minutes until full dark. He looked at the terrain between the North Road and the ranch with the eyes of a man who has been reading this specific ground for 6 weeks and knows every approach angle and every piece of natural cover and exactly how long it takes to move between them. Sam, he said. Sam looked up from the table. Pistol from the drawer. Bar the back door. Stay below the window line. Sam moved. He was across the kitchen in 4 steps. He had known where the pistol was since the afternoon 3 weeks ago when Eli had shown him without making a ceremony of it. Just information, delivered at the level of any other practical knowledge the ranch required. Clara was already at the corner of the front room. She took the sharps from its oilcloth. She checked it in the sequence Thomas had taught her. Every function verified by feel, nothing assumed. She went to the side window. Ellie went to the porch. The 7 riders stopped at the gate. They spread as they came through. A practiced response to an open property, covering the angles, establishing positions. Professional. Clara counted the spread and matched it against the defensive map she had been carrying in her head for weeks. 3 toward the house, 2 toward the barn, 2 circling south. The 2 going south were going to find the draw where Eli was already moving. A voice from the gate, Jake Wallace. She recognized him from the description Garrett had given after Brennan had pointed him out in town the previous month. Younger than she had imagined. Harder? Around the eyes, Mrs. Danner. Come out and nobody gets hurt. We just need a conversation about what you've been sending to Santa Fe. She moved to the eastern windark. A sound, brief, controlled. One of the circling riders, gone. The second circling rider wheeled and called back to the group in a voice that had alarm in it. The 3 front riders shifted their positions. She moved to the back door. She calculated the sight lines from this position. 1 barn rider visible in profile between her and the eastern approach, looking toward the house, not toward the pasture to his south. She opened the back door. She moved along the south wall of the house in the shadow of the overhang. Slowly, each foot placed before weight was committed, the way she had been taught to move in conditions where sound was the primary liability. She reached the southeast corner. Both barn riders visible now, and beyond them, moving through the near pasture at a low run, Eli closing on the front rider, who had dismounted and was approaching the house on foot. She raced the sharps. The front flanking rider was raising his rifle toward Eli's moving shape. She read the distance. 60 yards. Wind from the west, slight and consistent. She read the angle and the relative motion and the speed of the movement she needed to stop. She did not aim for center mass. She aimed for his right hand. She fired. The rifle flew from his hand. He grabbed his wrist. His horse shied hard. He went sideways, fighting the animal, all attention on staying in the saddle, and none of it on anything else. From the far side of the property, 2 shots from Eli's position, close together, decisive. Wallace. The house. Someone's in the house. Clara was already moving back along the south wall. One of the remaining front riders broke south toward the sound of the previous shots, exactly as Eli had said they would, because a disrupted group always sends someone toward the last known threat. He came around the corner of the barn fast and found Eli already there. What happened next was brief. The 2 remaining front riders pulled back toward the gate. They had the professional's ability to recognize when the geometry had shifted decisively against them, and the professional's willingness to act on that recognition. Wallace called from somewhere near the gate. Danner? Ellie stepped out from the side of the barn. Clara came around the southeast corner of the house. They moved toward the center of the yard from opposite directions and stopped 8 feet apart. Not a planned formation, just the natural convergence of two people who had been moving through the same situation with the same understanding of it. Wallace was at the gate with one remaining rider. His face in the last of the dusk light had the look of a man doing arithmetic. He does not like the answer to. "This is finished," Eli said. Wallace looked at him. He looked at Clara and the sharps and the quality of stillness she was keeping. He looked at where his men had been and where they were now. He made the calculation. He rode out through the gate. His last rider went with him. The yard was quiet from the back door. "Are you hit?" Sam's voice, steady, controlled. The voice of a 10-year-old who has decided that fear is not useful and has temporarily set it aside. "No," Clara said. "Both of you?" "Both of us," Eli said. The back door opened. Sam came into the yard with the lamp. Clara and Eli stood in the center of the yard in the cold November dark. The smell of gunpowder was thin in the cold air. To the north, the sound of Wallace's retreat was already fading into distance. Sam looked at the evidence of what had happened, the marks in the earth, the gate standing open, the specific disorder of a contested space in its aftermath, with the careful cataloging eyes she had come to know as simply how he looked at the world. Gathering information, filing it, deciding what it meant. "Is it over?" he asked. "This part?" Eli said. Sam looked at him. "What's the next part?" Ellie looked at Clara. Clara looked at the open gate and the dark road beyond it, and thought about a territorial governor's office in Santa Fe and a warrant that was being prepared, and the specific name, Marcus Colby, written in the margin of a paper that Thomas Whitmore had signed in August, knowing it might not be enough. "The next part," she said, "is finishing what Thomas started." She walked toward the house. Sam fell into step beside Eli without thinking about it. The way he did things now, without deciding to, as naturally as a boy falls into steps beside the people he has decided belong to him. Neither of them said anything about it. The lamp made a small warm circle in the dark yard, and the stars were clear and very bright overhead, and the ranch was quiet except for the horses settling in the barn and the sound of the wind moving across the flat land the way it always moved. They went inside. The door closed. The lamp burned in the window. There is a specific kind of quiet that follows violence, not peace. Peace is something built deliberately over time, with intention and repeated choice. This quiet is simpler and more primitive than that. It is the quiet of a space where something loud has recently been, now stilled. The particular silence of a yard. After riders have gone, and the gate stands open, and the lamp is still burning in the kitchen window, and the people inside the house are checking on each other without making a performance of it. Clara had known that quiet before. She had known it. She had known it in the weeks after Thomas died, the ranch in early morning, the eastern pasture empty, the particular silence of a house that used to contain two people and now contained one. That silence had weight to it. It pressed against the walls. This one was different. This one had other people in it. Territorial Marshal Ira Coles arrived from the governor's seat on a gray Thursday morning 11 days after the attack on the ranch. He came with 2 deputies and papers bearing the governor's seal, and he went first to Harland's chambers at the courthouse, which was the correct procedural sequence and which Clara had predicted to within a day of the actual arrival. She had known the response was coming because Cole Briggs had ridden to Santa Fe and the package had been received and signed for, and because the name Marcus Colby connected to Harland's office, connected to the Wallace lands, purchases connected to Thomas Whitmore's documented case, was exactly the kind of layered territorial corruption that made governors move faster than their ordinary pace. She had not known how clean it would be. Coles was at the ranch by midday. He was a compact man in his middle 50s, with the unhurried manner of someone who has been doing difficult work long enough that he no longer needs to perform the difficulty. He tied his horse at the gate and came up the path and took off his hat when Clara opened the door. "Not a social gesture. A professional one, Mrs. Danner," he said. "I believe you've been expecting something along these lines." "Come in," she said. He came in and sat at the kitchen table and looked at Eli, who was standing against the far wall with his arms crossed, and gave him a nod that contained no hostility and no particular warmth and a great deal of professional assessment. Ellie nodded back. Cole set his papers on the table. He spoke plainly, which she appreciated. Judge Harland had been formally charged under territorial statute with land fraud, conspiracy to defraud the Territorial Land Commission, and complicity in the procurement of insider survey information for personal financial benefit. Marcus Colby had been arrested in Kansas City 4 days ago. 2 county council members were cooperating with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. The railroad company's Kansas City office had provided documentary evidence confirming Colby's role as the conduit between the survey documentation and the county purchasers. The motion against Clara's land claim was suspended pending investigation outcome, which in practice meant it was void. A motion filed by a man under criminal indictment had no standing in the territorial circuit. The Irfan court filing had been withdrawn by Broderick on Wednesday morning for the same reason. "The boy stays," Cole said. Clara held his gaze. "Thank you," she said. "Thank the documentation," he said. "Whoever put that package together understood exactly what a territorial court needs to see." The chain of evidence was clean from the first document to the last. He looked at the second journal on the table. "I'll need formal statements from both of you. The ranch attack, the garrison meeting, the full chain of the land purchase records." He looked at Eli. "And a separate conversation about Garrison's role and his departure from the territory." "I know," Eli said. "Your prior history with Garrison's operation is in the record," Cole said. "I'm not here to reopen it. What I need is your account of his involvement in the current matter and what you know about his current whereabouts." "He's gone," Eli said. "He gave Mrs. Danner the documents at Coyote Springs, and he rode south that same night. He told us he was leaving the territory. Has he been back?" "No." Coles wrote something on his papers. He looked at Eli for a moment with the specific assessment of a man deciding how much weight to put on a statement. "You vouch for that?" he said. "Yes." "Yes," Eli said. Coles wrote again. He asked his remaining questions. They gave their answers. The statements took most of the afternoon. When Coles stood to leave, he stopped at the kitchen door and looked at Clara. "Thomas Whitmore built a sound case," he said. "What he had wasn't quite enough on its own. The county level was too compromised to move it forward. What you added made it complete and gave it a venue that couldn't be blocked." He put on his hat. He was a good sheriff. It's a shame he didn't have more time. "He had the time he had," Clara said. "He used it well." Coles nodded. He went out. Sam came home from school that afternoon with Margaret's usual note in his coat pocket about the day's lessons and a drawing of a horse he had made during the geography period that he brought in with the sheepish confidence of a boy who knows he has been drawing instead of paying attention to latitude lines, but considers the drawing worth it. He set the drawing on the table. He looked at Clara's face. He looked at Eli's. He had been doing this since the first week, reading rooms, reading faces, the specific attentiveness of a child who had learned that the way adults look at each other tells you more about the actual situation than anything they say. He read something in the quality of their stillness that was different from the watchful, forward-leaning stillness of the past 3 weeks. "Something happened," he said. "Yes," Clara said. He sat down at the table. He put both hands on the surface. He waited. "The motion is withdrawn," Eli said. "Harland is under indictment by the territorial governor's office. The legal action against you has no standing." Sam was quiet. He looked at the drawing of the horse on the table. He looked at the window. He looked at the eastern pasture. Visible through it, the fence line that Eli had repaired 4 times this season, and that was holding cleanly now the horses moving in the late afternoon light with the unhurried ease of animals that have not been disturbed. He did not say anything for a while. Then, "Good." He picked up the drawing, looked at it for a moment, and set it on the stack of papers at the end of the table that had become his section of the kitchen's daily geography. He went to the cabinet to get a cup for coffee. Clara watched him cross the kitchen. This boy who had been sleeping in the barn 6 weeks ago, who had held a pistol in a back doorway while 7 riders came through the north gate, who had been making himself useful in every available way since the morning he came in from the cold, and sat down at her table with both hands wrapped around a cup. She thought about Thomas's journal entry. He deserves better than what life has given him. Yes, she thought, and he is going to get it. She looked at Eli. He was looking at Sam with the specific expression he had when he was feeling something he had not yet found words for. The look that meant the words would not arrive for a while, and he had decided to live with the feeling until they did. Sam poured his coffee and came back to the table and sat down and opened his primer, which was what he did in the late afternoon, the settled domestic habit of a child who has started to believe the afternoon is going to be reliably. The same, Clara went to the stove. Ellie went outside to finish the fence work. The house went on in its ordinary way, which was the whole point. Harland's arrest happened on a Friday coals, and his deputies rode through Harland Creek's Main Street at 8 in the morning, and Harland came out of the courthouse building with his coat buttoned incorrectly. This detail traveled faster than any other detail of the event, because it was the detail that made it real in a way that legal language did not. A man in full control of himself does not button his coat wrong. A man who is frightened and being watched and trying to appear unhurried buttons it wrong and does not notice until he is already outside. Garrett saw it. He told everyone. Clara was not there. She had received Coles's notification the previous evening and read it and put it with the other papers and gone to bed at the usual time and slept without difficulty, which surprised her slightly and then did not surprise her at all. She had been carrying the weight of what Thomas had started. For 8 weeks the weight had been set down. Her body knew it before she did. She heard about the coat from Garrett, who rode out to the ranch that afternoon with a load of fence supplies he had been meaning to deliver for 2 weeks, which was a legitimate errand he could have completed at any point in the previous 2 weeks, and had not. He drank coffee at the kitchen table and described the coat and described Harland's face and described the way the street had looked. Doors open that were not usually open, people in doorways who had no particular business there, the specific quality of a small community watching something it has been waiting for. "Brennan?" Eli asked. "Rode south Thursday night," Garrett said. "Packed horse. Nobody stopped him." Ellie looked at Clara. "Coles told me," she said. Brennan cooperated. He gave them the name of the man from the railroad's legal office who arranged the original survey access. In exchange for his cooperation, Coles gave him a head start on whatever comes next. She looked at her coffee. "He'll need to be available for testimony if it goes to trial. He knows that. He'll cooperate," Eli said. Brennan always moved toward whichever weight was heavier. Garrett finished his coffee. He stood and put on his hat and looked around the kitchen the way he had looked around it each of the 3 times he had come to the ranch, taking in the details of it, the lived-in specific quality that a house acquires when people are actually living in it, rather than occupying it, the second journal on the table. Sam's homework spread across one end of it. 2 cups already rinsed in the basin. Good kitchen, he said. He put his hat on. He went out. Clara looked at the door after it closed. She thought about what a kitchen meant to a man who had been watching a ranch go empty for 3 weeks after a sheriff died. The specific statement of two rinsed cups and a boy's homework and a journal that had done what it was built to do. She thought about Thomas, not with grief anymore, with the clean, permanent regard of someone who has processed the loss fully and kept what was worth keeping. He had been a good man. He had loved her in the only way he knew. He had documented 3 years of evidence with the precision of a man who believed the law could hold if you gave it something solid enough to hold on to. He had been right about Eli. He had been right about Sam. He had been wrong about telling her. She had forgiven him for that the same night she had said it. Out loud for the last time, standing at the door of the old mill in the dark, while Eli fell into step beside her without being asked. It was done. She picked up the rinsed cups and put them back on the shelf. The rider came from the south on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after Harland's arrest. Clara saw him from the kitchen window. A lone rider on the south approach road, coming at a pace that was neither urgent nor casual, but something in between, the pace of a man who has made a decision about where he is going and is moving toward it without drama. She looked at his horse before she looked at him. A bay with good conformation and a slightly unusual way of carrying its head. She had seen that horse before. At the mill outside Coyote Springs, she did not move for the Sharps. She went out. Ellie came off the porch behind her without being asked. The rider stopped at the gate and sat his horse and held his hat in both hands and looked at both of them with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the calculated pleasantness of the initial visit, not the specific weight of a man delivering an ultimatum. Something else. The expression of a person who has arrived at a place they were not certain they would arrive at and is looking at it carefully. Now that they are here. You said you were leaving, Clara said. I am, Wade Garrison said. Tonight, he reached into his inside coat pocket, slowly, and with both hands visible, and produced a small folded paper. I heard about Harland. Heard the indictment named Colby. Yes, she said. I held something back at the mill, he said. I wasn't sure I was going to use it. But if the case goes to trial, Colby's lawyers will argue the Kansas City side of the transaction isn't documented in the primary record. His firm's receipts are internal documents. They'll claim privilege. He held the paper out through the gate. This documents the payment from Harland's county account to Colby's personal account. External bank record. Not subject to privilege. Coles will know what to do with it. Clara stepped forward and took it. She read it. She looked up. Why, she said. He looked at her. He looked past her at the ranch. The house with its lamp already lit in the kitchen window. The barn with the horses putting their heads over the stall doors. Sam's lamp, visible through his window, where the boy was doing his evening reading. I told you at the mill, he said. I'm tired. He looked at Eli. I looked for a way out. For 20 years. I never found one that worked cleanly, but I watched you find one, and I watched what it looked like from the outside, and I figured if I was going anyway, I might as well go useful. He paused. There's no accounting in that. I know it. I'm not asking for one. Ellie said nothing. Wade settled his hat back on his head and took up his reins. Take care of the boy, he said, to neither of them specifically, to both of them, to the ranch itself, perhaps. He rode south. They watched him until he was a shape against the late afternoon sky. A smaller shape. Then the road was empty. Ellie said, Garrett told me he saw a rider matching Garrison's description in the saloon 3 weeks ago. 1 drink, paid, left. I know, Clara said. Garrett told me too. He's been circling. He's been deciding. She looked at the paper in her hand. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket, he decided. She looked at the empty South Road for a moment longer. Then she went inside to start supper, because the day was moving on, and there was work that needed doing, and a boy at her kitchen table who was going to want to tell her about whatever he had read in his primer, which he did every evening, which she had come to look forward to in the specific way you look forward to. Things that are consistently, reliably there. Jake Wallace came to Harland Creek on a Friday. He came alone. He tied his horse at the hitching post outside the saloon. He went inside and ordered a whiskey and sat at the bar and drank it and ordered another and sat with the second one and did not drink it. He was waiting. He was not hiding. He was not threatening anyone. He was simply sitting at the bar of the saloon in a town where everyone knew his name and everyone knew why he was there, and the waiting itself was the message. I know where you are. I'm here. Come find me, or I'll come find you. Word reached the ranch through Margaret Wells, who had been in the dry goods store when the saloon's news traveled 2 doors down the way. Saloon news travels in small towns, fast accurately, without much embellishment. Because the unembellished version was already sufficient, Margaret sent the Henderson boy on a horse with a note that said only, "Wallace is at the saloon." He came alone. Clara read the note at the kitchen table. She set it down. Ellie came in from the barn. She handed him the note. He read it. He set it down. He looked out the window at the north road in the way she had come to recognize, not looking at what was there, but at what the approach geometry meant. He has nothing left, Eli said. Harland is gone. His gang is broken. The ranch attack failed. He looked at the table. Men in that position do one of 2 things. They run, or they fix on one thing and come at it directly. He didn't run. He fixed, she said. Yes. Sam was at school. She had 40 minutes before she needed to decide. He'll come here tonight if we don't go to him, Eli said, after dark, with whatever men he has left. The approach from the north, same as before. But this time he knows our defensive positions. He looked at her. In town, there are witnesses. The geometry is open, no approach angle, and whatever happens, it happens in front of 60 people. She thought about that. She thought about a council chamber and a journal placed on a table, and 63 people watching from their chairs, and the specific power of doing a thing in public that you could have done in private, but chose not to. We go to him, she said. Ellie nodded. Sam stays at the Hendersons, she said. I'll ride ahead and tell them, he said. He went out. She stood at the kitchen window for a moment. The eastern pasture was quiet. The fence line was holding. The horses were moving in the thin November light with the ease of animals in a place they have decided is safe. She went to the corner of the front room. She took the sharps from its oilcloth. She checked it the way Thomas had taught her. Every function verified in sequence. The sequence never varied, because the sequence was not ceremony, but discipline. A mind that proceeds through the same steps every time does not skip steps when the situation is urgent. The urgency is when the discipline matters most. She put on her coat. She went out to meet Eli, coming back around the side of the barn. They rode into Harland Creek in the middle of the afternoon. The main street was conducting its ordinary Friday business. The freight wagon outside Morrison's. 2 women from the eastern ranches. At the dry goods steps, the farrier's hammer from the side street. Children coming out of the schoolhouse in the early release way of Friday afternoons. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary November, light, pale, and low. But the word had traveled. The doors were open that were not usually open at this hour. A man stood on the mercantile steps with no apparent errand. 2 women had found reasons to be at the upper window of the boarding house. Old Garrett was at the livery entrance with his hat in his hands. Harland Creek had come to watch. They tied their horses at the post in front of the land office and walked. Wallace came out of the saloon when they were 20 yards away. He had been at the window. He had seen them coming, and he had made the decision before they arrived. She could see it in the way he came out, not hesitating in the doorway, just moving through it and onto the boardwalk and stopping. The decision had been made inside. Coming out was the execution of it. He looked like a man who had been wearing his anger for a long time and had worn it thin enough that what was underneath it was visible now. Something older and less functional than anger, something that did not have a strategy attached to it. His brother was dead. His operation was finished. The ranch that was supposed to be easy leverage had cost him more than he had. "Danner," he said. Eli stopped. Clara stopped beside him. "You cost me my brother," Wallace said. "Your brother came to my property with 6 other men," Eli said. "He made his choices. He was doing what needed doing," Wallace said. He looked at Clara. He looked at the Sharps at her side. He looked back at Eli with the expression of a man who has passed the point where information changes his intentions. "You think that warrant out of Santa Fe is going to protect you from everything? Harlan's gone. Brennan's gone. You think this territory is suddenly going to be safe for people like you?" "People like us," Eli said, "are going to keep working our ranch and raising our family and handling whatever comes, same as we've been doing." Wallace's eyes went to Clara. "That rifle," he said. "That's the rifle everyone in 3 counties has been talking about. The widow who only needs 1 shot." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. The expression of a man deciding whether the story is impressive or insulting. "Let's see it." He reached for his gun. He was fast. She had been told, in the days after the ranch attack, that Jake Wallace was fast with a pistol. She had filed this information the way she filed everything, neutrally, without judgment, as a fact requiring an appropriate response rather than an emotional reaction. She was faster. 1 shot, not his chest, not the standard target of a person shooting, to end a fight permanently. His right hand, the hand just closing on the grip of the pistol, the hand that would fire the gun if the gun remained in it. The Sharps spoke once in the cold November air. The pistol flew from Wallace's hand. He grabbed his wrist. He stood on the boardwalk, holding his wrist, and his mouth was open, and he was looking at his hand with the specific expression of a man who has just had the most reliable thing he owned taken from him by a woman with an old rifle that everyone in 3 counties had been calling a legend. He looked at his hand. He looked up at Clara. She had already lowered the rifle. She was looking at him with the expression she had worn behind the feed store in October. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not anger. The plain, settled attention of someone who has done what was necessary and is waiting for the situation to reach its natural conclusion. The pistol lay on the boardwalk between them. 1 shot, Wallace said. It came out quiet. Wondering almost. "That's all I've ever needed," she said. Coles stepped out from the doorway of the telegraph office across the street. His deputies came from the side alley where they had been since the moment Coles received Margaret's message that morning. Wallace looked at them. He looked at his wrist. He looked at the 60-some people watching from doorways and windows and the steps of the mercantile. He did not resist. Coles's deputy took him by the arm, and he went. The street was very still. Then, from the doorway of the mercantile, Cole Briggs said something. She could not make out the specific words, but the 2 men near him agreed with it, and a woman further down the boardwalk echoed it, and the sound that moved through the gathered crowd on Harland Creek's main street on that November afternoon was not cheering. It was quieter than cheering. It was the sound a community makes when it recognizes something true, when it looks at what it has been seeing for 6 weeks and finally understands what it was looking at. Garrett, at the livery entrance, put his hat back on, not the gesture of a man ending a vigil, the gesture of a man who has been keeping accurate account of events and has just recorded the final entry. They rode home in the late afternoon light. The road was familiar in the way roads become familiar when you have traveled them in all conditions and all weathers. In the gold light of October and the pale cold of November, in the dark after difficult evenings, and in the early morning before the day's work began. The cottonwoods along the creek road were bare now, their branches against the sky like careful drawings of themselves. The eastern hills were the gray-brown color of the season. Neither of them spoke for the first mile, not from awkwardness, from the specific companionable quiet of two people who have just been through something together and have not yet moved from the experience into the telling of it. At the second mile, Eli said, You aimed for his hand. Yes, she said, from that distance, in the time available, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Most people wouldn't have taken that shot. Most people would have aimed for center mass. Most people would have been right to, she said. I didn't want a death. I wanted the geometry resolved. She looked at the road. The easy shot would have been fatal. The difficult shot was the right one. Thomas taught me that the difficult shot is almost always the right one. He taught you more than shooting, Eli said. She thought about that. He taught me the discipline of it, she said. Not the way you build a practice until it stops being effort. The way you read everything before you act. On anything. She looked at the hills. The shooting was the visible part. The rest of it, the patience, the reading, the willingness to wait until you know what you actually know. That was the larger lesson. I've been applying it to everything else for 20 years. Ellie was quiet. You do the same thing, she said. With terrain, with people. You read everything before you move. Different school, he said. Same lesson, she said. They rode in silence for a while. She was thinking about Thomas, not about paper he had signs, or the truth he had not told her, or the 8 years of careful, respectful, hollow marriage. She was thinking about the eastern pasture in the evenings, the light going gold, the sound of the sharps carrying across the flat land. She was thinking about his voice, saying, Read the world before you read the distance, and the way he had made her. Do it again and again until it was not a technique but a habit, and not a habit but a nature. He had given her that. Whatever else he had got wrong, he had given her that. The ranch came into view when they crested the last hill, the house, the barn, the horses in the near pasture, the lamp already burning in the kitchen window. Sam had left it lit before they sent him to the Hendersons. He did this every time now, not because anyone had asked him to, because he had decided sometime in the past 6 weeks that a lamp in the window for people coming home was a thing worth doing. She looked at the light for a moment before they rode down. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. December came in quietly. The first real snow of the season arrived on a Wednesday and stayed. Not the brief covering of early winter that melts by afternoon, but the real snow, the settling snow, the snow that means the season has decided and is not reconsidering. The eastern pasture went white to the fence posts. The barn roof wore it in a clean, even layer. The horses stood in their stalls with the content inward attention of animals that are warm and fed and asking for nothing more. Ellie had predicted it 4 days before it arrived, which Sam had noted in his composition book under the heading, Things My Father Knows That the Almanac Doesn't. He had been keeping this list since October. It had 11 entries. Clara had found the composition book on the kitchen shelf while looking for the second journal, and had read the list twice before putting it back exactly where she found it, Tuesday morning. Cold and clear, the sky the specific pale blue of winter. Clara was at the south fence post before breakfast. Cole Briggs was already there, hat in hand, breath visible in the cold air. 7 weeks of Tuesday mornings. He was better than he had been in October, not remarkably better, not in a way that would make anyone reconsider their estimate of his talent. But he had developed something she had not entirely expected from him, which was genuine patience, not performed patience, not the performance of a young man trying to appear disciplined. The actual thing, the specific stillness of someone who has accepted that they are learning something real, which cannot be hurried, and has stopped trying to hurry it. She showed him the wind reading sequence, not because he needed to see it again, because repetition was the mechanism, and the mechanism was the lesson, and the lesson was the point. Not shooting, but the practice of attending to everything before you act on anything. She read the grass near the post. She read the dust at the base of it. She read the rope she had hung between the posts for the purpose of these Tuesday mornings, its swing and weight, and the rhythm of the wind's effect on it. "You're not watching the target," Cole said. "Not yet," she said. "When do you watch it?" "When everything that surrounds it is already known," she said. "The target is the last thing you look at. The world around it is the first thing. Read the world first, every time, until you do it without deciding to." He looked at the grass. He looked at the dust. He looked at the rope. He was quiet in the right way. "All right," he said. She stepped back. He raised his arm. He read the wind. He waited. He fired. Not perfect, not close to perfect, but he was reading the wind before he raised the rifle, which in October he had not been doing, which was the entire lesson, which was the whole point. Better, she said he took it, the way he had learned to take it, as the complete sentence it was, not a prologue, to something warmer. He had learned that about her in 7 weeks. Her praise was specific, and it was meant, and it did not require elaboration. He was a decent learner when he kept his pride quiet. She thought Thomas would have liked him. After a while, Sam's school composition came home on a Friday. Miss Wells had assigned the whole class to write about family, a standard autumn assignment. She had told Clara, good for vocabulary and for the kind of thinking that required children to look at what they had and find words for it. Sam brought it home in his coat pocket, folded twice. He set it on the table at supper without mentioning it, and then, after they had eaten, and Clara was clearing the plates and Eli was at the far end of the table with the ranch accounts, he took it out and unfolded it. Miss Wells said, "I should read it," he said. Clara set down the plate she was holding. Eli looked up from the accounts. Sam smoothed the paper on the table and read it straight through, in the careful, precise voice of a boy who has been taught by someone who takes reasoning aloud seriously. "My family. My father is a man who knows where the weather is coming from. Before it arrives, he reads the ground and the sky and the way the horses stand, and he knows things that other people have to wait to find out. He does not say very much, but when he says something, it is worth listening to because he has thought about it first. My mother is a woman who only needs one shot. She taught me that the most important things to read are not the thing you are looking at, but everything around it. She is the person who opened the back door and told me to come in out of the cold, and I did not know then that I was not going to have to leave. I did not have a family before. I had people who were supposed to be and were not. Now I have people who were not supposed to be and are. I think that is better. I think it is better because they did not take me in because they were supposed to. They took me in because they decided to. There is a difference, and I know what it is." Samuel Carter Danner. Age 10, he folded the paper along its existing creases and set it on the table. He looked at his plate. Ely was looking at the wall. Clara picked up the bread basket and passed it to him. He took a piece of bread. He looked at it. He put it on his plate. Sam, who had been watching from under his eyelashes with the precision of a child who has learned to read rooms, went back to his supper. They finished the meal in the comfortable silence of people who have said what needed saying and did not require it to be repeated. After supper, after Sam was in his room with the door cracked open, the small, unconscious habit of a boy who has stopped needing to monitor the distance between himself and the nearest exit, Clara and Eli sat in the kitchen. The lamp was on. The stove was warm. The second journal was on the table, closed. Its work was done for now. Maybe, for a while, Ellie said, without preamble. I'm not here because of Thomas anymore. She looked at him. I've been thinking about how to say it plainly, he said. I've been thinking about it for a while. I want to say it plainly. She looked at the lamp flame. She looked at his hands on the table, the scarred, cold country hands that had moved a horse into the wind on the 3rd mile of a November ride without knowing she was watching. I know, she said. I want to say it anyway. All right, she said. He looked at her with the gray, steady eyes that had given away nothing in Harland's chambers 8 weeks ago, and now gave away this, that he meant what he was about to say, and had been meaning it for longer than he had been saying it. I'm here because this is mine, he said. Because you are mine, and Sam is mine, and the fence line, and the horses, and the kitchen table, and Tuesday mornings, and the lamp in the window. If you'll have it that way, the fire ticked in the stove. Outside, the snow on the pasture held the last of the evening light. In that way, snowfields do. A faint silver quality in the dark, luminous without a source, as if the land itself had decided to stay bright a little longer than the sky. I'll have it that way, she said. He nodded once. He picked up his coffee cup. She looked at the window. She thought about October, about a lot behind a feed store, and a tin cup on a rope, and the specific quality of silence that had followed. One shot from a rifle, everyone thought was a keepsake. She thought about a courthouse hallway and a man holding his hat in both hands who had said, I don't own things that can think for themselves, and had meant it about coffee made before she came downstairs, about a map drawn from memory and corrected by a 10-year-old who knew which way a creek bent, about a barn door, closed and opened again, and a person walking out into the evening, not entirely. The same person who had gone in. She thought about Thomas. She thought about him with the clean, uncomplicated regard she had arrived at. Somewhere between the mill and this kitchen, the regard of someone who has finished the difficult work of understanding a person completely, including the parts that disappointed them, and has chosen to carry what was good and let the rest be what it was. He had been a good man. He had loved her in the only way he knew how. He had pointed at a target on the eastern pasture 20 years ago and said, read the world before you read the distance, and in doing so had given her something that had outlasted the marriage and the grief and the 8 weeks of documentation and the moment on Main Street when a pistol flew from a man's hand in the cold November air. He had given her the practice. The practice had given her everything else. Ellie refilled her coffee without being asked. She drank it and looked at the window and thought about what it meant to be. The woman who only needed one shot, not the legend of it, not Garrett's careful telling of it, but the daily, undramatic reality of it, which was just this. A person who had been taught to read the world before acting in it, who had kept the practice long past the teacher's death, who had applied it to terrain and weather and legal documents and the specific situation of two people trying to find a common language in a small house on a cold October morning, and who had found, in the applying of it, that patience was not the same as passivity, and stillness was not the same as absence, and the difficult shot was almost always the right one. The Sharps was in its oilcloth in the corner of the front room. It would stay there, not because trouble was finished. Trouble was never finished in a territory still finding its shape, and there would be other Thursdays, other letters, other riders on North roads. But because the lamp in the window was for people coming home, and the sharps in the corner was for everything else, and knowing the difference between those two things was the whole of the practice. Old Garrett lived to be 81 years old, which was longer than most people managed in that country. In that century, and he spent the last 15 of those years telling the true version of the story to anyone who would sit still long enough. He always ended the same way. "People ask me what the lesson is," he would say, in the unhurried voice of a man who has been keeping honest account of things for a very long time. They always want a lesson. They want something they can carry away and use. He would look at whoever was listening with the patient, accurate look of a man deciding whether they were ready to hear the actual answer. "There isn't one," he would say. "There's just what happened. A woman who was never what the town thought she was. A man who was trying to be something different from what he'd been. A boy who needed a place that wasn't going to disappear on him. And the three of them deciding, day by day, without making announcements about it, that what they'd built together was the thing worth protecting." He would put his hat on. "She only ever needed one shot," he would say. "That part's true. Everyone knows that part. But the shot isn't the story. The shot is just where it starts. The lamp burned in the kitchen window that night the way it burned every night now, not because anyone was expected, not because the dark held anything specific to be afraid of, just because it had become the practice of a house where people came home, and the lamp was the simplest way of saying, 'We are here, and here is good, and you are welcome in it.' Some practices start as necessity. The best ones become love. This was one of those.